If you're parenting an autistic child and it feels like they always have their hands in their pants, I want to say this clearly right away. You're not doing anything wrong, and your child also isn't doing anything wrong. This is probably one of the most common things parents come to me about, usually quietly and often worried as well. Because it can look sexual and it happens in public, and no one really explains what's going on in a way that actually helps. I'm Kath. I'm an autistic ADHD parent, and I've worked in sexual health for over 30 years, and I support families around this exact situation all the time. I've also got a son, and he spent a lot of time when he was younger with his hands in his pants. So I know what it's like as a parent to have a child who's constantly got their hands down there. But here's the most important thing to know up front about this. For most kids, the behavior, it's about regulation and it's not about sexuality. And I'm starting with autistic kids because this shows up very clearly there. But what I'm talking about also applies to neurodivergent kids more broadly, including ADHD and AuDHD as well. And this is about how nervous systems work, not labels. Most of the time, when a neurodivergent child has their hands in their pants, they're not masturbating. What they're usually doing is resting their hands. They might be putting pressure on their body down there. They might be fidgeting or tweaking, or they could be calming themselves, often without really thinking about it. Genitals, they're very sensitive. And that sensitivity, what it does is it gives strong, predictable sensory input. And so for many autistic kids, that can actually feel calming. And look, this sits in that same group of behaviors as in hair twirling, skin picking, chewing, or sitting on hands as well. So this isn't about desire or intent. It's just about the body trying to feel settled or regulated. And once you see it this way, the behavior starts to make a lot more sense to us as parents. So autistic nervous systems, they rely more on body-based ways to regulate. So pressure helps, repetition helps, and predictable sensations help as well. And look, the genitals are always there. They're always the same and they're always effective. So when a child is anxious, bored, tired, overstimulated, or overwhelmed, this can easily become a go-to option for regulation. But there's also habit involved as well. So neurodivergent kids will often repeat regulating behaviours for longer, not because they're being difficult, but because their brains don't automatically switch strategies just because a social rule exists. And this is why this behaviour is so often misunderstood because of those social rules around it. So, in most cases, as I've said, this is not sexual and it's not bad behaviour and it's not a sign that you failed at parenting. It's also not something that needs punishment. I work in sexual health and I take safety very seriously, but I don't assume sexual meaning where there usually isn't any. And when parents jump straight into panic, what often follows is shame. And shame, that makes learning harder for our kids, not easier. Almost every parent I've worked with has had this moment where you're out somewhere and your child's hands are straight in their pants and your body tightens. You freeze and you react quickly, or you say, "Stop that," louder than you meant to. And later, that guilt, it does show up. And I've seen this over and over, and I've been there myself as a parent. No one actually prepares us for how confronting this can feel before we understand what's actually happening. And what I've found is that once parents realize that this is about regulation, not intention, that fear starts to ease. And when that fear eases, teaching becomes possible. Parents are usually told they have two options: ignore it completely or stop it immediately. And look, neither really work. Ignoring it forever doesn't teach social context. And eventually they get to an age where they're old enough to know better and other people start noticing. So it has a social impact on your child. But stopping it also through shame, what that does is it creates secrecy and confusion about bodies. It also stops them from being able to regulate themselves as well. So the goal here as a parent is about giving guidance, but without shame. And what's most important to remember is that you're not teaching a child whether they can touch their body or not. What you're actually teaching them is where it's okay to do it. And to do that, kids need that one clear, repeatable message. And this is the message to use. Touching your genitals, it's okay. Genitals are private. But private touching happens in private places. And that's enough. You don't need long explanations. You don't need big conversations in the moment either. Just clear, literal language that stays the same. And how you say this matters just as much as the words. So in the moment, it's important to not yell. It's not about scolding. It's not about threatening them. It's not about lecturing them. Teaching doesn't land when a nervous system's overwhelmed. So correcting their behaviour, it should come across as being neutral. It's just like reminding them to put their shoes on before you go out in the car. So I'm going to share some examples that can work well. Hands, stay outside your pants when we're with people or when we're out of the house. Private parts are for private places. If your body needs that, you can go to your room. Now, I just want to mention with that one, sometimes kids will hold themselves because they need to go to the toilet. So it can help if you're checking that they don't need to go to the bathroom as well. But usually they're doing it for a regulation thing. It really only becomes masturbation related as kids get older and get closer towards puberty. Now, it's also important to use the same tone that you'd use for everyday reminders like brushing their teeth or putting their dirty washing in the basket. So it's important to not be angry, not be embarrassed, just to be really clear about the boundary and the directions. And sometimes you don't even need words. So it can be just a matter of going and pointing and going hands. That's what I used to do with my son. I'd just look and point and the hands would come out of the pants. So I didn't have to say something. So there's lots of different ways to handle it in a shame-free way. But look, eventually they do outgrow that habit. Now, something that I want to talk about is that for some kids, sometimes you can replace it with a fidget toy. Look, this is a metal one, but there's a wooden one that's like a round disc with a wooden ball in it. And what's good about this one is it's like a tweaking. Because think of it, it's usually kids with penises that hold their genitals. I don't know why, but it is. And the penis has lots of soft skin and you can tweak it and roll it between your fingers. So finding a fidget or something like that that they can have in their pocket to get that soothing repetition of that motion can be helpful as well. So that's just something to consider. I don't have the wooden version. I've only got this version, but I would try the wooden one first because the metal one doesn't roll quite so smoothly. So something else that you can do also is use that natural cue like hands, like what I said, the hands and the pointing. Now, this sort of thing works best when it's predictable and it's boring and it's not emotional. So you want to say it in an everyday way. You don't want to go say it in a shameful or embarrassing or silly way. And it also works better when we can also be around to help them as well. In regards to redirecting them away, that tends to work best when it's predictable and it's boring and it's everyday where it's not emotional. It also works better when adults can design things to help as well, where you can provide them with something else to do with their hands. And being clear about what counts as public and private is also really important. And making sure you respond the same or a similar way each time. And it's also about making sure that other caregivers and parents are on the same page in regards to how to respond to this sort of thing. Because safety isn't something that kids magically perform. It's something that adults help to set up. Now, this isn't quick. So for neurodivergent kids, progress for breaking that habit of hand-holding can look slow. It can take years until one day you suddenly realize that it's stopped. not because you forced it, but because the skill settled as well. So I just want to share that regulation is not misbehavior. I also want to point out that for some kids, redirecting their behavior, redirecting their attention to something else, or getting them to stop doing it isn't always the solution, because if they're doing it to regulate their feelings, if they're doing it because helps them to feel more secure, and we want them to stop that, that then means that that child is going to feel unsafe. So we do need to take into consideration, what can we replace that behavior with? So for example, my son the other day was tapping a pencil on something and it was really, really loud. And my automatic thought as a parent is to say, stop that. But he was doing it for a reason. And so instead, my response was, do you reckon you could tap on something, maybe tap that pencil on your leg rather than on the table, because I'm trying to do some work and it's really difficult to concentrate. And so that's what he did. So he was still able to regulate himself, but he was doing it in a way that wasn't, making life difficult for everyone else around him. And in regards to back to the hands in the pants, it's really important to remember that what we're doing is we're actually teaching our kids about privacy, and we're not teaching shame to them. And repeating those instructions clearly works much better than correction as well. And how you react actually teaches more than your words. Something I often talk about is kids learn more from what we do than what we say. So look, if this is something that you're currently dealing with, you're not too late. There's nothing wrong with your child, and you're already doing body safety and teaching sex ed, even if it doesn't feel like it when you're teaching these messages about private behaviours and things like that. And please remember that Sex Ed Rescue is there to help you with these sex ed conversations. And these are the sorts of things that I talk about over on my website as well, so that you as a parent don't have to work this out alone or when you're in a panic. If this video helped, the next one I recommend is what to do when kids ask awkward sex ed questions at the wrong time or in the wrong place, like at the dinner table or loudly in public at the supermarket. And what that video does is it builds directly on what we've talked about here. And it gives you a calm way to handle those moments without oversharing or shutting things down.